Hello all, today we're going to take a look at Ghosted, Navigating Strategies for Reducing Uncertainty and Implications Surrounding Ambiguous Loss by Febvre Fan. It was published in the June 2020 issue of Personal Relationships. If you'd like to read the article for yourself, check the description text down below for a citation and link. The end of a relationship is not a fun time for those involved. Relationship dissolution leads to all sorts of negative affective consequences including, for some, self-harm and suicide ideation. And those negative impacts tend to vary depending on who dumped whom, with unsurprisingly greater maleffects for the dumpee than the dumper. Now, while we have a fair bit of research on breakups, not much has yet been done regarding ghosting. For those unfamiliar with the term, ghosting refers to suddenly cutting off communication with someone. It typically occurs on dating applications and before a true committed relationship is formed. Additionally, ghosting can hurt more since it tends to happen more frequently. One key difference between ghosting and traditional breakups is that ghosting involves a great degree of uncertainty on behalf of the person being ghosted, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. A great deal of research has been done looking at how people deal with uncertainty and ways in which we try to reduce it. Passive strategies involve unobtrusive target observation, examining available information or surveilling. For example, someone being ghosted could look through the ghoster's social media profile to see if they've moved on. Active strategies involve seeking information through an intermediary like a mutual friend. Interactive strategies rely on direct communication with the source of uncertainty to clear up the situation. For example, a ghostee could reach out to the ghoster directly and ask if they are no longer interested in talking. Extractive strategies are kind of like active strategies, but instead they are conducted through a medium like a search engine or archive. This is different from passive in that a person engaging in an extractive strategy is more involved in going to greater lengths to get information than when using a passive strategy. Ambiguous loss theory extends this prior work on uncertainty reduction to situations in which there is no real resolution of the uncertainty. Ghosting fits particularly well in this framework since there's a paradox between having a physical and psychological absence and a digital or technological presence. The goal then is to find meaning among this ambiguity since closure is relative. Before I get into the nuts and bolts of the studies, I want to talk a bit about induction and replication designs. In an induction and replication, you first conduct a purely inductive study, that is, one without any formal hypotheses. And you just measure everything and see what findings come out of the mess. Then you redo the first study, but this time with the goal of replicating your findings. Following this procedure allows you to be open to surprising findings while still having adequate safeguards against spurious associations. Now, what sets these studies apart from others in the field of psychology is that they are entirely qualitative. Normally, we do quantitative studies, which allow us to determine not only if association exists, but also how strong that association is. We do fancy statistics and tease apart the existence, or lack thereof, of possible relationships. A qualitative study, on the other hand, consists of highly structured interviews conducted either in person or through survey software. The transcripts of those interviews are then dissected in highly structured ways to discover which themes were present across participants. While qualitative work is derided by some, I think it can be a valuable first look, especially in subjects for which we don't have a lot of prior research. Furthermore, the findings from qualitative studies can be excellent hypothesis fodder for future quantitative studies. As this first study is purely inductive, instead of hypotheses, the authors had two research questions. Research questions are like hypotheses in that they guide your study, but they don't have the formal backing of prior work and are merely there to guide your analysis rather than to have a prediction to test. The authors wanted to know what effective and ineffective strategies people use to deal with ghosting and what implications result from being ghosted. For both studies, they recruited samples through Amazon's Mechanical Turk. MTurk is a platform where researchers can recruit participants who are compensated through the platform at an average rate of 10 cents per minute. To participate in this study, subjects had to be fluent in English, live in America, be at least 18 years of age, and have been ghosted at some point in their life. It is important to note that the average time since the most recent ghosting event was almost 6 years prior to participating in this study. This may be influenced by the high number of married or long-term committed participants. Beyond eligibility and demographics questions, participants were asked about their history of being ghosted, as well as details about the most recent time they were ghosted. They were then asked 3 questions about how they reduced uncertainty after being ghosted. These included strategies that both helped and didn't help reduce their uncertainty. They were also asked about the implications of being ghosted. And now results. The largest group of responses was a kind of null category. 57% of participants were unaffected by being ghosted or didn't employ any strategies to reduce uncertainty. 56% of participants reported that they did some information seeking either passively, actively, interactively, or extractively. Participants also reported preemptively obstructing the future flow of contact with the person. 37% of participants said that they tried to focus on the future. This could come in the form of just trying to accept the situation and move on, and/or trying to find a new potential partner to communicate with. 23% said that they focused on themselves in negative ways. Some experienced intense psychological pain, and some started to blame themselves for the situation. 14% said that they focused on themselves in positive ways. They used self-encouragement and sought out solace from friends and professionals. And 8% said that they tried to distract themselves with other activities like exercise and music. 6% of responses were undecipherable or otherwise unclassifiable. Here we see a chart depicting the percentage of people who used the various strategies and found them effective or ineffective. It's important to note that what we care about is not necessarily how long each bar is, but rather how long the bars are in comparison to each other. If not many people used a strategy, its effectiveness bar will be low even if it was way more effective than ineffective. With that out of the way, I think we can say that moving on was, on the whole, pretty effective, as was self-encouragement. Interactive information seeking wasn't particularly effective, and psychological pain, unsurprisingly, didn't help at all. As to implications, 10 categories emerged. 19% were hesitant or scared to engage in communication, especially to initiate a potential relationship. 18% of participants said that they grew to accept the situation. 13% were pessimistic as a result of being ghosted. 10% had emotional reactions. 10% rationalized the past or their previous partner. Another 10% said they had no implications from being ghosted. 6% discontinued dating. 5% focused on themselves in ways that decreased their self-worth. 4% focused inward as to ways they could avoid being ghosted in the future. 4% reframed being ghosted as a positive event in that it led to better things. And 3% of responses were unintelligible and/or unclassifiable. On to study 2, participants were paid $1.50 for what I'm assuming was a time commitment of about 15 minutes. As to measures, it's a case of once more same as before, but instead of freely responding with what strategies they used, participants instead evaluated whether they felt the strategies found in the previous studies were helpful or not. This was done using a 5-point Likert scale. Before I get into this chart, I want to say that the other findings replicated study 1. Now here's where I disagree with the authors' methodology. They simply listed the highest scores for effectiveness and ineffectiveness and left it at that. I personally would have run a series of t-tests to determine which strategies had the greatest difference between ratings of effectiveness and ratings of ineffectiveness. Now, I don't have the time to do that just based on the information provided in the paper, so instead I made a graph of all those ratings side by side with 95 confidence interval error bars so we can eyeball it. By my estimation, the most effective strategies were moving on, self-encouragement, distraction, and solace. The least effective strategies were self-blame, passive information gathering, and no strategy. So in sum, I think we see that people tend to engage in a bunch of different strategies to deal with being ghosted, and that being ghosted can lead to some not-so-fun outcomes. We also observe that some strategies seem to be a lot more effective than others, in particular moving on, self-encouragement, solace, and distraction. As to limitations, I might as well state the obvious that we don't have a lot to say how effective these strategies were, not to mention why they were effective. I will also repeat that people were reflecting on events which occurred years ago, so there could be some memory effects involved. We also don't know why a large portion of the participant pools did not experience any kind of emotional consequences due to being ghosted. I would really like to see a conceptual replication restricted to people currently in the dating sphere, maybe only those using dating apps. I think this particular population will provide much cleaner and more representative data regarding the ghostee experience. You could even do a daily diary study if you had the time and the funds. I also want to see some work looking at potential mediators. The authors had a number of ideas as to why certain strategies were perceived as more effective, but to my knowledge, no one has tested them yet. So that might be some cool work. All in all, this is a great first look at a topic I think will see a lot of research in the coming years. Please like, share, and subscribe, and if you've got a paper you'd like me to dissect, or more thoughts on this one, let me know in the comments.